Well, hello there, everyone. My name is Pamela Noury, and I am one of Noble Caledonia's expedition leaders. And I have with me here today Craig Ward on all the way the other side of the world. I'm from South Africa, where I'm sitting, and Craig Ward has been working for us, also maybe 10 years or so. He is a superb naturalist, also a fantastic photographer. But most importantly, he is one of the expedition leaders that knows the Indo-Pacific area, Australia, down to New Zealand, and all the way across the South Pacific the best. And that's really what we wanted to talk about today, is one of, I guess, our mutual favorite itineraries, also one of the most challenging itineraries, is the South Pacific. Hello, Craig. Where are you chatting from?
Hi, yeah, thanks for the introduction and the lead-in. Very nice of you. I'm at home in far north Queensland, Australia, so I'm almost exactly an hour's driving time north of Cairns. So it's very much a rainforest part of the world, and of course the Great Barrier Reef is just right out there. 25 minutes in the right kind of boat.
So, Craig, let's chat a bit about the South Pacific now. I guess the first and main question is, okay, if people like the tropics, they like beaches, swimming, snorkeling, all that kind of stuff, obviously the South Pacific is a great kind of area for them to go to. When I first thought about the South Pacific, I thought it was really just that, mainly beaches and swimming. I, came to learn about the incredible diversity of cultures and all that stuff there as well, which is really why I like to go. But what would be the allure to go all the way across to the actual opposite side of the globe if you're coming from the UK? It's a long way to travel. You've got jet lag, with a huge time change, as well as the long, arduous journey to get over there. So what's the crux of makes it worthwhile to go all the way over there as opposed to just popping across to the Canary Islands or something?
Sure. Well, you and I have spoken about this much over the years, and I think what we do as travel professionals is provide the unique. And sometimes unique places are far afield. And so if you consider the Pacific trio that we do a couple of times each year, you're talking about in excess of a dozen different countries. Each one is completely different from the last. You're talking about some of the largest atolls in the world. You're talking about some of the most biodiverse marine ecosystems. You start or finish, depending on which direction you go in the Coral Triangle, and then you move through that attenuation zone. Every single group of islands is different from the last. They're different in terms of the marine biodiversity, they're different in terms of the animal and plant biodiversity, and culturally, Papua New Guinea couldn't be more different from Easter Island, and yet there's a connectivity amongst those cultural groups as well. So it's just quite unlike anywhere else on Earth.
Yeah, I'm actually going to share over to the Google Earth map here. I don't know if you can see that. So this is showing the extent of the South Pacific, not quite, or maybe just on the left-hand side of the screen there, all the way over to Papua New Guinea. I'm not quite sure if it's in. On the right-hand side of the screen or the east, you've got Easter Island, and all those little dots are waypoints that we have stored from all the places that we go to across the South Pacific. So it really shows you a picture. This would be 2 voyages worth from here, that's Easter Island, across to Tahiti side, and then across to Fiji side over there, and that's the 3rd voyage that you could do all the way across to Papua New Guinea. So you're talking just in these 2 voyages, you're talking like 90 degrees of longitude, more or less along the same latitude line, and yet it's not repetitive at all, as one might think, a bunch of islands dotted across the same latitude. It's not really repetitive at all. The huge cultural diversity, as you mentioned, to dozens of islands, high islands, atolls. It's really quite staggering. And I think because it is a long way to come, I always suggest people do at least 2 of these trips back to back. The Island Sky, you've got your Antarctic season and your Kimberley season. But in April, May, and October, September, October, the island sky is traveling across this whole band of the Pacific to move between the Antarctic and the Kimberley. And I mean, if you got to do all three, it's absolutely staggering. But I would always say to people, try and do two, since you're coming all the way across here. And it's not repetitive at all. It's very much a huge array of diversity as you travel.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're quite right. I've done all three with numbers of guests who have stayed on and done a pair, either the first pair or the second pair, depending on how you look at it. But as you've said, now that you've zoomed in there a little bit, you have Rapa Nui, Easter Island, at one end, which is again utterly unique, quite like anything anywhere else on Earth. But there is a connectivity between the culture of Rapa Nui and elements right the way across the Pacific. You can see the Pitcairn group in there, those four extraordinary islands, all completely different from each other, and amongst the most remote islands on Earth. And then you get into these French Polynesian clusters, the Tuamotus, which are just literally picture postcard perfect atolls. And the cultural diversity from one island to the next is just utterly striking. And then of course we head up north into the Marquesas. There you go, right there. And again, the island formations, the geology is completely different from the coral atolls to the south, and correspondingly the culture changes again. And that's a single trip. That's before we then move down into Tahiti and change the groups around and continue to move west. And again, it all changes completely again. So that's a single trip.
Yeah.
Massively diverse.
Absolutely, Craig. And the other thing is, we get to travel the whole globe working on Noble Caledonia's fleet. And I must say, there's very few places in the world where you can actually find an uninhabited island. You'll sometimes be in Indonesia and you'll see an island that seems uninhabited, and you turn up and it's, there's loads of people there. And across these chain of islands, you'll actually come across loads of pristine, uninhabited islands that's just sort of, as you say, the postcard is what you're looking for. And you can actually find these things here still in this day and age. So it's quite amazing.
Sure, and one of my favorite examples of what you're just talking about there, again, are the Pitcairn group. Most people don't realize this, but the Pitcairn Island, which of course everybody's heard of, is just one of four islands, and they're three of them are completely uninhabited, and it's entirely possible that two of them were never inhabited. So again, these tiny remote islands with not a living soul on them. So quite extraordinary, and we do find uninhabited little atolls again and again, and of course we go out of our way to visit them. It's a privilege, to be sure.
Yeah. I mean, you just can't compare it to the more touristic, easy to get to places. And speaking of easy to get to, these places are not. We go there every year regularly, but they're not. Every place we go to every day, every island is a real challenge. And I zoomed out on Google Earth at the moment just to sort of illustrate the fact that you could have a big system anywhere in the Pacific, and it's just sending swells right across the Pacific, unimpeded by significant land masses. And now you've got these tiny little specks of islands and atolls, and we turn up with our little ship alongside this tiny little speck of an island at the mercy of swell from anywhere across the Pacific, and it's really, really challenging. And so I often view this itinerary in this area as a bit of a high risk, high reward. It's difficult to get us ashore in these places. And you are at the mercy of a huge amount of swell. Pacific was poorly named, I guess. But what is that for you? I mean, the challenges of being in EL with this difficult conditions. And while you answer, I'm going to cross over to some images.
Sure. Yeah, there's little doubt about it. You know, lots of expedition folk comment on, you know, there's halcyon places to get to, the high Arctic and the Antarctica, but it's true. I think some of the most challenging conditions in the world, and I'm the tropical guy, you know, I don't spend much time in the cold, so most of my work is done in bare feet and board shorts, you know, but the Pacific Islands are exactly as you just described. They're tiny, they're at the mercy of these enormous ocean swells, and getting in and out of them can be a real challenge. And I have to say, it's actually one of my favorite parts of the job. You know, we get to work with these fabulous collections of folk. You know, we typically have a team of 10 experts who drive our Zodiacs and keep everybody safe. And so we work very closely with the crew on board the ship at the marina deck. It's always safety first. But, you know, I've been floating around in these places now for 25 years, and with the fabulous teams of professionals we get to work with, I think as long as we put safety first, and, you know, you get a bit of luck with the weather and the conditions as well. We have a remarkably high strike rate on these trips. Many of the places you just would have to cancel on any given day. But I pride myself on a really high strike rate and a very good safety record. But sure, it's a really challenging part of the world. But like you say, the reward is enormous, and you constantly have to manage that element of risk. But the reward, I mean, just look at the images. There's places once you land, you're inside the lagoon. They're just idyllic.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, you know, because you've got a long distance to go between islands, and so you've only got this small window of opportunity, sometimes half a day or a day, to make that island happen. And you can't just linger around as though, you know, there's 5 other islands nearby. You've got to move along to get to cover all these distances as well. So you do have a sort of often a singular shot at some of these islands. And here on the top left, the first image, Easter Island, if you start the itinerary there, you're starting the whole itinerary by Zodiac. You embark the whole cruise by Zodiac. There's often a little bit of small surf or chop to get you and the luggage on board at Easter Island. So it's sort of baptism of fire from the get-go. And then all these little islands, for the most part, the ship anchors on the outside, and there's the challenge of getting us in through either through a channel or just you know, through a little gap to get you onto those outer beaches. And then once you get into the lagoons, generally speaking, it just betrays the whole nature of the challenge that was on the outside, because they're absolutely spectacular on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you do the 3 that gets you from one side of the Pacific to the other, it's about 6 weeks at sea. And so, again, most guests don't do all 3, but the team is usually at least largely the same right the way across. So that's 6 weeks of expedition content, day in, day out, often 2 different things in the day. And I think from memory, there are 3 or 4 times that the ship goes alongside. And that's including 2 of the turnaround days, you know. So it is very much intensive Zodiac and expedition work. But again, like you say, the rewards are fantastic. Some of the finest snorkeling in the world, and you know, these just stunning islands with unique wildlife, one from the next.
Yeah, Craig, we're both marine biologists and scuba divers. And I know when I first got asked to do the South Pacific job, I mean, I just thought this wasn't even something that would be on my bucket list. It was just so unimaginable for me to be able to think I could go diving and exploring in the South Pacific. And I know, you know, having dived in places and snorkeled all over the world, I mean, obviously Indian Ocean loads for me, Caribbean, etc. The experiences I've had in the South Pacific, I remember one time seeing tuna, I mean, as in huge tuna on the exit of this atoll where we were snorkeling. And I just thought, I mean, that's just not something I ever thought I would get to see live. You know, and I've done thousands of dives like you probably, and it's just, yeah, when you get to these places that are so far away from major land masses and major sources of pollution, yes, they're at the mercy of global warming, coral bleaching, but particularly with the flushing of these atolls, the cold water coming upwellings around the edge of these atolls, and then the flushing in and out of the lagoon, you can get a huge amount of productivity and amazing snorkeling across these islands.
Yeah, absolutely. The visibility is almost always fantastic, and so surprisingly, there's many of these islands have really strong tidal effects, and so, like you say, that flushing in and out of the sometimes dozens of channels that some islands have, as opposed to others where there's just a single channel to speak of. The flow of water, the speed with which water flushes in and out of these things can be really quite astonishing, and it lends itself to drift snorkeling, drift diving, that sort of thing. But it encourages the large pelagic fish to come in, and so it really can be some of the best snorkeling in the world. And of course, as you're traveling west towards Australasia, you are moving into the Coral Triangle, the epicenter of marine biodiversity, where there is literally just more species of fish, more species of coral, more species of any group of animals you'd like to consider than anywhere else in the world. So, yeah, lots going on this very varied itinerary for sure.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I've mentioned, you know, it is very challenging for us with the conditions, getting people off the ship onto the Zodiac with big swells, getting them through these channels into the lagoons. But I would say from the guest point of view, it's, you know, those same challenges aren't as pronounced. And in fact, the snorkeling is really quite easy. Of course, it can be sometimes energetic getting off the ship onto the Zodiacs, but the snorkeling itself is really idyllic, as you say. It's almost always clear water. And so I've had people that have never been swimmers their whole lives, never snorkeled before once ever. And you get them on a trip like this, you get them into the water and you get them to see things that, I mean, I certainly know how unique and amazing it is, and you're thinking some of these people have lived their whole lives, you know, and they're now in retirement and they're getting to snorkel for the first time, see coral reefs the first time here. I mean, that I just find so incredible and rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real highlight of the trip for many. You know, we talked about how infrequently the ship goes alongside, and you mentioned the ship being on anchor. That image there, number 7, actually indicates what it's really like almost all of the time. Excuse me. The ship can't even anchor a lot of the time because of the depth of water around these tiny little islands. And yeah, we get a load of guests who don't consider themselves very strong swimmers, have never snorkeled before, and there's this sense that we must find a lovely little beach from which to do this. But in fact, the really exciting snorkeling opportunities are often a little bit further out as well. So that image there that you have in number 7 is a perfect indicator of how we set up these fabulous snorkeling opportunities. And it's substantially easier than getting in and out of a beach situation. You know, the ladders can be slightly challenging to climb out of the water, but you know, getting in is just so easy. And you're right there. You're on top of the coral reef. You're on top of everything that one would want to see on these excursions. And it's carried out in a very safe way, with safety boats looking out for people and helping with instructions, and we have staff in the water to help out and to guide. And so yeah, it's really lovely when we have folk come along who have this as their very first opportunity to snorkel. It's yeah, world class for sure.
So I think the snorkeling is kind of like the cherry on top. For me, I don't know if you agree, but it's there's little island communities and the cultural stuff that you can see, the archaeology or anthropology even, that you see across these island chains, and meeting these tiny little remote communities and the people in them is one of the real highlights. But before I ask you about that, I had some slides here on the beach cleanups that we do. Now, alongside the privilege of going to these places, we also find, particularly on the outsides of the atolls, a staggering amount of ocean plastic that's drifting around the Pacific, gets snagged up on some of these islands and atolls. And so something we always try to do, and the guests love it as well, everyone often gets so involved, is walking on the beach. They'll just bring back to the landing some of this plastic that we find across. I mean, we found computer screens and rubber boots and loads of fishing gear actually on the South Pacific. But that's definitely a part of it for us, is to try and leave these places maybe even better than we found them, which is kind of a highlight. But Craig, tell us about the culture and the diversity of the little communities. I think you mentioned there's more than a dozen different countries that we visit. All of them have dances, and you meet the people, and that's such a highlight to meet these guys on these little islands, on the opposite side of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. The peopling of this part of the world is a fascinating subject in its own right, and we almost always have guest lecturers, anthropologists who can really lighten this subject up for us, as detailed as it is. So there is a connectivity throughout the whole of the Polynesian triangle, with respect to how people move through that area, how their cultures are connected. And yet there is this fascinating distinction. Fiji, for example, couldn't be more different from Tonga, but there are very clear similarities. Easter Island couldn't be more different from Papua New Guinea, and yet there are similarities and connectivity again. But even when you're in particular groups, for example, the Marquesas, they're all largely closely connected, but the cultural performance you'll see on one island, or even one side of the island to another, are completely different, and yet you can see the similarity and the connectivity. So as you move through the Cook Islands and Fiji and Tonga and Vanuatu and the Solomons, we can see the similarities, but we quickly recognize the distinctions, and every place is exactly that, distinct from the last and the next. So we keep coming back to the same point, really. It's such an incredibly varied cluster of itineraries.
Yeah, I guess before I went, I was really, obviously I knew about the Moai and Easter Island, and I was really excited to see that. But what amazed me was, and I just had this image here, number 21, of some of these statues and remains that you find in the Marquesas. And you go ashore and there's like virtually nothing or no one, and you sort of scramble up a little bit into the jungle, and you come across these incredible ruins, remains, Moai or related items. And this just is sort of more of a highlight, because it's these sort of lesser known, feeling as though you're coming across it for the first time, statues and things, and we might be the only ones there, and you thought, does everyone else know about these? They're amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you talk about the Moai, the Marquesas. Outside of Easter Island, the Marquesas have the largest Moai throughout the entire region. They're diminutive by comparison to those on Easter Island, but they're still, I'm pretty sure the largest on the Marquesas is between 2 and 3 meters. So it's a whopper, although it's much smaller than those of Easter Island, like I say. But the various morai and archaeological areas throughout the region have, again, both clear similarity, but emphatic distinction as well. But the Marquesas are a very special group within this trio of itineraries, if for no other reason than the geology. There are a lot of low-lying coral reef islands throughout the broader region, but the Marquesas are these wonderfully uplifted mountainous islands. They're really distinctive, quite striking. That's right there at number 20. Yeah.
And Craig, now we've sort of been chatting almost in an east to west kind of vein. So now moving towards the western side, your Fiji, Tonga, for me, it's very much now changing into wonderful hiking, more birding, more land-based, or like not so much coastal wildlife as interior land-based wildlife, and the hiking and the waterfalls and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I must say, as a biologist, my preference is to do this east to west, because you're moving towards that extraordinary biodiversity. Like I say, the Coral Triangle, the oldest rainforest on the planet, and some of the most extensive tracts of rainforest outside of the Americas. So yeah, everything starts to become more biodiverse. Again, the reefs, the rainforests, and absolutely everything you can think of, really. But you start to get into those wonderfully mountainous and volcanic islands. So there's really good opportunity for solid leg stretches. We have several hikes in Vanuatu that are well over an hour one way, and then there's the return journey as well. Perfect for birding, as almost all of the islands have one, if not several, endemic species. So it's a really important group of itineraries for those who are keen on wildlife and birds in particular. Some really good hikes.
I mean, I think if you have in mind just like sort of beaches and swimming, that's not how I would prepare for a trip like this. I'm thinking like bug spray, even maybe those head nets. You got to have those really good hiking sandals, wet dry hiking sandals. It's fairly intrepid. You got your sunblock, your insect repellent, your binoculars, your camera, your hiking sandals, nice sort of outdoor clothing that's quick dry. You have these big spells of rain just come out of nowhere, and the next thing you're soaked and you're in the forest. And so it's quite an adventure. It's definitely not like the holiday where you're just parking off on a beach. It's wet and wild, and it's quite a muddy in places wildlife adventure is how I would describe the whole thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what these itineraries amount to. They are genuine world-class expedition content from start to finish. So, there is plenty of time to sit on these wonderful tropical beaches with a glass of champagne after you've finished your swimming. Absolutely. So there's plenty of that going on, but it is all expedition. Again, some really challenging zodiac work. I've stood on Pentecost Island watching the divers in pouring rain, so much so that hardly any of us took a single photograph. So and then a couple of hours later it was brilliant and clear, and we all went swimming down the road. So just standing around in these tropical places, again, especially as you get into Melanesia and up into Papua New Guinea, the humidity can be off the chart. So just standing around, you're dripping wet, you know. So it's all part of the challenge and the deal, but it's real expeditionary stuff all the way through, for sure.
So Craig, I know if people are thinking of coming on these trips, it's well worth doing some reading up on maybe the Cook journeys, the Cook voyages, and a couple of those sorts of explorers that were prominent in the South Pacific. Also, you got to watch, obviously, Wake of the Bounty. We normally show it on board. Are there any other good resources that you can think of, we can suggest to people to get them, you know, if they're planning on coming on a trip like this, they can read now that they're home or watch?
Yeah, I had a bit of a look through my library earlier on today, and it's a keeper. It's certainly not one that you'd travel with, but a good friend of mine, although I haven't spoken to him for many years, I don't know if you can see that. There you go. Yeah. This is a fantastic, all-encompassing piece. It is still available. You can probably get it on Amazon. If there's a single volume that covers the entire region that we're talking about, then this would be it. Kerry House, the editor, is a historian, a professor in New Zealand, actually, and there's an exhibition that goes along with this thing, and they took it on tour probably about 15 years ago. But if you can all see that, again, it's not a book to travel with, but it's a fantastic overview of that entire region. Really well done.
Whenever we're on board and you suggest books or references or websites to people, it's always a little bit like, well, they can't do much about it now, but it's great now. Everyone might be watching from home. They can actually order those sorts of books on Amazon and do that pre-reading. So, Craig, thanks so much for your time. It's been so nice to chat about South Pacific. And is there anything final you want to add? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap it up there.
Sure. I think we've had a fairly comprehensive chat about the things that we like about the place. You know, we don't know exactly when we're going to be out and about again, do we, at the moment, which is something to contend with. But yeah, we'll be running those trips twice next year, like you say. Yeah, I'll put my hat in the ring right now. If you'd like me to be yell again on those, I'd like.
Yeah, for sure. If you're going on those trips, folks, you're probably going to bump into Craig, and you'll be very lucky if you do. Craig, thanks so much for your time. It's been great to chat, and enjoy the rest of your time. Stay home, stay safe, and we'll probably chat again soon about Kimberley or your little backyard nature tour.
Sounds really good. Yeah. Take care. Like you said, stay safe. Thanks heaps.
Okay, bye.